So welcome to another edition of On My Couch. So introductions first. So my name's Damien. I'm the founder of OMC Group, and what we do is leadership development, leadership team effectiveness, culture. But to put it really simply, what we focus on is how do we help people work better together. So I'm joined here with my co-host Sue. So Sue, maybe do you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Damien. So Sue O'Malley. I have what I would describe as a portfolio career. So I do a little bit of consulting, a little bit of board work, having spent 30-something years in the corporate sector in property, retail and marketing. So really looking forward to our guest today, Damien, and unpacking a little bit more about leadership. Cool,
terrific. And I'll introduce Kel in a minute. So but, you know, as I said, this show is On My Couch. What's the intent? It's really around actually we're all on our metaphorical respective couches, and that's the sense for having a conversation, having a really relaxed conversation. And Kelly, how this started was Sue and I sort of really wanted to have good conversations with interesting people, who are smarter than us in particular areas. So no pressure, but that's what we wanted to do, an informal conversation. As Sue mentioned, it's really about probably the theme that runs through a lot is around leadership and that theme of working better together. And I mean, I'll start your sort of your background and your CV, which is super impressive. So you're currently the vice president, head of HR for a multinational business based in Hong Kong, and over the last 10 years you've split yourself time between Hong Kong and Melbourne. So been a chief people officer, vice president human resources international, senior vice president, head of learning and development, general manager HR. So a seasoned HR strategic executive, which is fantastic. So I mean, I could go on, but maybe tell us more about you, Kelly, and maybe sort of your side hustle, if we can call it that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I've been working mostly in HR and org development types of roles for about I think it's almost 25 years. So I'm getting up there, and I have worked across 6 different industries, 9 companies, multiple countries over that time. I've lived and worked in the US, Australia, and now I'm based in Hong Kong and supporting, I think my team looks after, I want to say it's 19 countries at the moment. So, pretty diverse background. And over the course of my career, I've been really fortunate to have some great leaders who have taken risks on me and who have thrown me into the deep end on projects that I had no idea what I was doing on, and was forced to really just be open to learning and be open to those experiences. And that's really contributed to what I look at now as quite a rich career. Okay. And right now I am, I guess I'd call myself a work in progress. I'm transitioning to what Sue talked about as a portfolio career. So I still have a full-time day job, keeps me very busy. And then I'm in the process of building a psychotherapy practice, which is technically on the side. It's on my nights and weekends. And I've got all kinds of other ideas for businesses or ventures, if you like, that are related to human performance, wellness, et cetera. So it's pretty cool. I feel like it's like a little rebirth happening at the moment.
Great. Terrific.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that Damien didn't mention on your CV, as I was reviewing it, HR manager of Playboy Enterprises. Now, you must, every interview you go to, someone must go, oh, tell me please about what was that like? And I suppose in the context of what you're doing today and what you're transitioning to, perhaps just share a little bit of insight as to what the HR manager of Playboy Enterprises might do.
Yeah, that you are 100% right. That question comes up every single time anyone looks at my profile. And usually the question I get is, did you see the women? And the answer is yes, on occasion. But I worked at the corporate headquarters, which at the time was in Chicago, which is where the magazine was originally founded. And I was an HR manager for that location. And it was quite interesting. One of the reasons that I ended up there was I had gone to university in Florida, and I was thinking about making a move to Chicago, and I was researching companies that were based in Chicago and came across a listing for Playboy, and it called out some statistics about Playboy. And one of them was that it was 55% female, which struck me. And that kind of always stuck in my mind that, hang on, this is an organization I would never expect to be run by and staffed by so many women. But it had a female CEO, female CFO, female CIO,
Wow.
chief tech officer at the time. And that just stayed in my mind. And so when I stumbled across a listing and threw in a resume and went and met them. And I think, honestly, I was so junior at the time. I think they hired me because they thought I would fit into their culture. And yeah, I was there only for 2 years because the opportunity came up to move to Australia. But I honestly think if I hadn't left the US, I would probably have, stayed working for that company for ages. It was an absolute ball. Culturally, steeped in history, big part of America's, this idea of freedom and fun and entertainment. It was controversial still back then. And the people who worked there were rebels. They were people who didn't like policy. They didn't like convention. They argued about everything. And it was just a really, really fun place to work.
Wow, that's fascinating. That's fascinating. So psychotherapist, what does that mean in layman's terms?
Yeah, it is a clinically trained mental health counselor, basically. So it is, if you go to do a psychology degree, for example, typically you would have a research focus, and you would need to be doing lots of experiments and producing lots of research. I was really interested in the more practical application of and working in the mental health field, and so I chose this angle to pursue. And so, yeah, a psychotherapist basically is someone who works in practice, working with people in the mental health space. So I work with clients who they come with lots of different issues, but I find, I don't know if this is by design or if it's just happening kind of randomly, but I find a lot of the clients that I end up working with are dealing with anxiety issues and stress, worried about how well they're doing in life, where they are in life. Are they, living up to their potential? Are they keeping up with their peers, et cetera? So I end up working with a lot of clients that are that present with anxiety. More than depression, which I don't know, maybe that's something about my bio that people with depression don't want to come and talk to me, but not sure.
And do you, are you engaged by organizations or by individuals, or can you straddle both?
Mostly by individuals. So I am currently differentiating between psychotherapy and what I would call more exec coaching. Mm-hmm. I do think in my future, as I continue to kind of pull back from the corporate world in my day job, I think that I will end up doing a bit more of the exec coaching work because there are a lot of parallels. But right now, what I'm very focused on is building the psychotherapy and counseling practice and keeping it separate from my day job. So it is very much individually engaged. People find me through the other people in our clinic, because I do practice through a clinic. And so we have bios on a website for our clinic, and people find me that way, or word of mouth. It's mostly individually driven at the moment.
And so is it, what do you, I suppose, you love about it? Is it getting inside and unpacking and just talking to people, or and how would you describe success?
Great question. I don't know if I'm successful. Yeah, this is actually something that therapists wrestle with, because a lot of times you don't know if a lot of the work is a lot about opening a door for someone, or helping someone to look at things differently. And so you don't often find out, unless they keep coming back and telling you kind of how they're going. They might go and make a change that you don't know whether that was because of something that you did with them, or because you just opened up some possibilities that got them thinking differently, and then they made a change, or what. So in terms of, how do you know if you're successful? Right now, the only real indication I have is that people keep coming back. And I have a good set of clients that they keep coming. So yeah, and I'm sorry, there was a first part of your question.
So I think you sort of answered it. Is it that you get people to open up, and you sort of delve into what their challenges are and sort of help them navigate their own outcomes, I'm guessing, because you can't do that for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I think that kind of led me in this direction is that, well, there's a story about a graduate program that I did many years ago, which I can share, because that actually really got me thinking about all of this. But
what's the story?
So I did a master's degree program. I think I finished it in 2006, and it doesn't exist anymore. It was a very fringe program. It was it bounced around from Monash to RMIT and was in a few different places, but it was called Innovation and Service Management, which is a bizarre name. But the whole premise behind the program was, if you want to make an impact in life, in an organization, in your work, you have to understand the impact you have on other people. And in order to understand that you really have to have a very good understanding of yourself. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of came from this angle of interpersonal and organization dynamics, and how I'm behaving, how I'm showing up, how I'm checking, how people are receiving me, that sort of thing. And it was really, I felt oftentimes like a rat in a maze in that program, because it was very challenging and really forced us to rethink everything we had learned about interacting with other people. It wasn't about like, what's my DISC profile and what's your DISC profile, and are you an ISTJ or an ENFP or whatever. It was very much deeper than that. So who are you? What are your values? What do you stand for? How does that show up in the world? How do you know what impact you have on other people? And then how do you use that to influence in an organizational capacity? So it really rocked my world, but it got me kind of connected to this idea that how I show up really matters. And in order to show up well, I had to kind of deal with my own stuff. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that I enjoy most about the therapy work I do, is kind of trying to open that door for people to say, look, if something is not working for you the way you want it to at the moment, starting with yourself is actually a really useful way to spend your energy, because you can't actually change what other people are doing. You can change the way you're interacting with them, and that perhaps gets you a different outcome. And that's been a really fun thing to see that coming to life for people.
Yeah. So maybe if we just build on that and talk about the sort of that transition, or I'm interested in the similarities between, or are there similarities between your corporate OD, HR, senior executive roles and counselling. So what are, because you've already talked about the difference, but there's a difference between exec coaching and counselling and the work that you do, but also there's some similarities. So what's similar about the two roles, do you think?
Well, I think the similarities are really based in the individual wanting to make a change, wanting something to be different, right? So you can start with that from either position. I think the differences really are that in the counseling and psychotherapy work, you're actually trained to be able to go backwards through like their formative experiences, and how did they grow up, what were their early relationships like, etc. Whereas with exec coaching, it's mostly the training is mostly about forward thinking. So what can I change now and today to get a different outcome, but without the need to necessarily dive into why you're behaving the way you're behaving, and what's impacted how you're perceiving other people and how you're working with them, right?
Yeah. And so, what if you think about it, what do you think the corporate world could take out of, the practice of psychotherapy and counselling that would be helpful, would be beneficial? Bearing in mind the distinction that you've just made, but are there aspects of that you think, hang on, if we did more of this in organisations in the corporate world, it actually would be a better place, better outcomes? What do you think? What would
definitely? I mean, if you watch Billions, they've got that. Can't think of her name, the character's name, who is like she's kind of the HR person, but she's actually a therapist. There are actually companies that are looking at what I would call in-house in-house therapists or in-house psychologists, or they contract a service to play that role beyond EAP. It's beyond the employee assistance program, that kind of reactive, I'm having a problem, help me fix it or refer me somewhere. There are companies that are starting to look at how can we actually help people with their own stuff that is showing up at work in a more in a more holistic way or a longer term way, right? So almost like performance coaching, but an in-house performance coach that is there to play that role. I think the difference is that what we're seeing is, and it's a very early trend. I know there's not a lot of companies that are doing with this, but there are definitely some that are delving into it. Bringing in-house that support for people to be able to talk about stuff that maybe isn't a work issue, but it's stuff going on for them that is impacting how they're showing up at work.
Yeah.
I think there's tremendous opportunity there because you can't really separate yourself from, work. You can't really leave all that stuff that's going on at home or outside or in your own mind. You can't really leave it at the door when you walk in. It's going to show up through your behavior in some way, through your reactions, etc. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. My hunch, and this is just a hunch, my hunch is that it'll be a difficult one to navigate because companies are also worried about liability and, and particularly in US based companies where insurance is an issue, how do they, what becomes an insurance claim and what isn't an insurance claim? It's kind of fraught with all kinds of questions. So it's very early days, but I think there's lots of opportunity there.
Okay. Cool. I'll ask one more question then Sue. I think I'll hand it to you, but I'm curious. If you can answer this question, it's almost like which of your two children do you love the most? Which of your two jobs right now do you say you love them?
Well, they're different, Tamian.
Yeah.
They're different. So they no, and I'm joking, but that is an honest answer. But they are serving different purposes for me at the moment.
Cool.
So I get a lot of kind of personal and professional growth and stimulation from the work that I'm doing in the psychotherapy practice. I'm learning a truckload. I'm still quite new at this. I've only been really doing it for 2 years. So I'm still learning. And every kind of situation is teaching me a new way to navigate and grow. So that I'm getting a truckload of like intellectual stimulation and emotional stimulation and personal growth from that. I also, there's still a big part of me that likes working in organizations and likes, I guess there's an element of it that this is like my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
So it provides a really nice balance between, being in a role where you're just doing nothing but stretching and you're exhausted from all the learning. I can balance that out in a role that I actually feel pretty comfortable in. There's interesting work going on, and I'm kind of not ready to let that go yet. So they're serving different purposes. Cool. But even that in and of itself is an interesting shift, because I used to, and earlier in my career, my identity was a lot of like what I do and where I work and the role that I play. And so even for me to be able to kind of start pulling back from that and craft something new is really nice for me. It makes me feel like, okay, I'm broadening beyond just identifying with my day job.
Yeah. Cool.
You've obviously had a lot of international experience. I'm just going to switch gears a little bit now and just talk about culture. And you mentioned how the size of your teams across various countries. So, how do you create a culture that's consistent across diverse geographic locations, given the cultural differences and all of that the whole myriad of what, operating in a worldwide sense looks like?
I don't know if I have, to be quite honest. I can tell you what we're trying to do, what I've been trying to do. I think that there needs to be some connective tissue, right? Regardless of where you live and work. People join an organization for particular reasons. And I think understanding what those reasons are, a lot of times they join because they love the idea of what the organization is trying to do, or they identify with, they might, in retail, for example, they might know and love the brand.
Mm-hmm.
So there's typically, what I've seen is there is some connective tissue. There's some stuff that flows through regardless of where you are. The thing that I have always, that I've struggled with, but come to a level of acceptance about as well, is that I'm a firm believer that culture is very much driven by leaders, and how leaders show up is what kind of culture you get, right? And so there are differences. We've got, leaders that might sit in Hong Kong, but they're leading teams in Vietnam or, Guatemala. And that team, because of the way the leader behaves, might operate completely differently than another team with a different leader.
Right.
So one of the things that I have tried to focus on over the course of my career is really working with leaders to help them understand. And again, this ties back into my wacky master's program, but helping them understand the impact that they are having on their people. How do they know what impact they're having on their people? What kind of data are they looking at to get an indication of whether they're creating the type of environment that we want, et cetera. So it's a long answer. I don't actually know that we've nailed it by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think leaders are, you could have an amazing organization and you have a leader that just isn't showing up in the right way, and the whole culture of that team is impacted by it. So that's where I've tended to spend my energy, quite honestly. But the cross-cultural angle, I think, for me, the way to kind of navigate through that is by developing curiosity in our leaders, because curiosity and openness, I think, is one thing that you just have to have if you're going to go into any new community, even if it's in your same country, right? Otherwise you come in assuming you know everything, assuming that everybody just needs to follow what you say, when actually they might have a lot of really great knowledge and practices and things that they already have implemented. And if you come at it with curiosity and openness, you can learn something from them.
Yeah, I think it's always amazing that one person can have such a deep impact. Yeah. And I think you often see the downside of someone that's not right, and you just naturally accept the good, because the business is running as usual. And I think there's a lot of great people that are doing really leading teams very well that probably don't get recognized enough because they make it look easy, and it's not easy.
That, I think you're absolutely right. And I think we naturally focus on what's not working, right? So we're overlooking all of this stuff that's going well and really shining a light on the people that are doing an excellent job. I think you're spot on.
And which is sort of, normally at some stage during these conversations, we gravitate towards this topic of leadership, and bang, here we are. And so one of the things that we quite often ask, people, because I think it's sort of, it's nuanced, right? But given your experience in terms of multinationals and Australia, America, and Asia, working with a whole range of different leaders, I mean, what's your definition of leadership? If we had to, put you on the spot, which we are, how would you, if I say what's leadership, how would you answer that question?
Oh boy. Well, I haven't like wordsmith this at all, but I think for me, there's something about authenticity. There's something about a real person showing up every day and doing the best that they can.
Yep.
And being open about that.
Yeah.
Being willing to say, I have no idea what I'm doing here. I've never navigated this. Can we work on this together? That for me is leadership, even just personal leadership, being able to kind of take ownership for what you know, what you don't know, and bring people around you to work on things together. And I think that breeds a level of connection with people that is important in leadership. I don't think that you can be kind of a remote, individual who's sitting in a, room just orchestrating and dictating and all of that, because people want to work for another human being and with another human being. We're kind of designed and wired to work together and work in community. So for me, there's something about an authentic person who shows up, flaws and all, acknowledges those, and then works with their people to try to bring out the best of everyone together so that the collective outcome is still, quite amazing.
Yeah. And you might think, well, I've just answered that question, but in a different way. But so given your experience, and again, the fact that you've supported, you've led, you've coached multiple leaders, right? What are you doing as a leader? What are you seeing different leaders do now than what than compared to, say, 10 years ago? So it might be being more authentic, being more open, but is there anything else? What's as leadership, like a lot of practices, leadership has evolved. What have you seen this shift over the last 10 years in terms of really good leaders that you work with, and or yourself when you lead your team? What are you concentrating on right now?
I think it's I don't know what the right word is, but it's the human element. We're real people, and work is a part of life. And I do see, and it may be that a lot of this was impacted by COVID. I think COVID in some ways it served us in some ways, because it forced us to figure out where work fits in our lives and where it sits in the grand scheme of priorities. But it also forced us to work differently. And one of the things that I've seen leaders really have to grapple with over the last little while is this idea that I don't have to have everybody sitting in front of me at a desk beavering away on their laptops to know that they're getting work done. The concept of trusting people to behave like adults and get their work done and lead through good priority setting, good goal setting, regular feedback and connection, that has been a real shift in my mind. And I've watched, and I have done a truckload of coaching leaders around that in the last few years, that discomfort they feel because they're being asked to lead differently. They don't have the easy guardrails of 9 to 6 or whatever at a desk where I can see everybody. That's easy, right?
Yeah.
I know they're working because they're sitting there, even if they're on Facebook all day, I can see they're working, right?
Yeah.
So that's a big one.
Yeah, okay. Or that I remember many years ago when I worked for a retail organization, it was almost a competition to see who could get into the office earliest.
Yeah.
That was a sign of you're committed and you're professional because you're there
early.
Early.
Yeah, well, and I got a little bit of coaching when I first moved to Asia. I can't even remember who it was. Somebody said to me, you will need to be careful about how long you stay in the office because people won't leave before you leave. So if you want to demonstrate to your team that you care about work-life balance, you need to leave, because then they will feel free to leave and they will start to see that you actually live this value of balance.
Yeah. So one last, so you go, Sue.
I was just going to say, so just on that question though, so what value do you put on the water cooler conversations? And you talked about connection, and Zoom calls are great, and there's no question about you getting everyone doing their own work, but they're very programmed. We're almost become this. I've got back-to-back Zoom calls, and there's no camaraderie piece. So how do you deal with that, and is that important, not important? Where do you put that in the scale?
Yeah, this is something that I as a leader wrestle with personally and individually, because it may not come across in this call, but I am quite introverted, and I could sit here and work all day and not need to see another human being. I'd be perfectly comfortable with that. But I recognize that that's me, that's my preference, it's not my team's preference, and that I shouldn't make the assumption that works for everybody. So what I'm trying to do, and the other leaders that I work with, we talk about a lot, is how do we encourage connection? Because and the thing is, this is a very real issue. I've got people who sit in Vietnam, I've got people who sit in China. Even if I wanted to have the water cooler conversation with them, I can't. So I have to lead differently no matter what. So I've been trying to find ways just to connect, not necessarily by forcing people into work on certain days and times, but coming up with like, hey, can we get together and work on this? I think we should workshop it, and it would be really cool if we could do it together, and I'll buy the pizza or whatever, those kinds of things, to try to create those moments, recognizing that I might not need it, but I do think people in my teams need it. And some of the other teams that I, work with and support need it. There is value in it, absolutely. One of the things that I do wrestle with a lot, and I don't have a good answer to it, is the idea that collaboration equals in person. That seems to be a trend that's happening at the moment, where I see a lot of companies that are, we want to bring everybody back to the office because, collaboration happens in person. And I think it's easier in person. I don't necessarily think it's a dependency.
Right. Okay, cool.
But I'm in the minority on that. So
I just think of all those other jobs that you can't do remotely,
Yeah.
And there's a lot of noise about, we need to be able to have this flexibility and have these hybrid working environments. But technically, if you're a policeman or you're an ambulance driver, or there are some roles that just don't allow that. And yet, so it's quite an interesting debate, because there's a lot of noise about it, but there's also a lot of roles that just don't work.
It's a non-issue.
It's a non-issue. And I just wonder what some of those people think of everyone talking about this hybrid working arrangement. They go, what are you on, guys? It doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting. There's a couple of clients that I've got that actually have that exact same situation. Some of them are frontline workers, and there's regular comms coming out about, how do we get people coming back to the workplace? And they're sort of saying, well, I haven't left the workplace. That's this whole thing about coming back. I would like to leave. Can I leave then come back? So that's kind of interesting. One last question from me about leadership, and you sort of just curious, and it could be a really dumb question, but nuances, from leadership, styles, from different countries. Is there any observations you can make, or is that too unsophisticated, because leadership is a sophisticated art form, and so you've got to be careful about making assumptions and stereotypes?
I think the latter is true. You do have to be careful about making assumptions and stereotypes. I think it very much depends on the individual's background. Because, for example, I work with a leader who is originally from India, but has worked in 6 different countries, and their perspective and the way they show up is shaped by all of that, right? So I would struggle to generalize. I think there are some cultural norms that go beyond leadership. It's more about how the workforce operates.
Okay.
So, things like the importance of coming together for lunch as a team in China, for example. Manager takes the team and buys them lunch. Like, that used to be a daily occurrence in China. Right. It was an expectation, right? Wow. The idea that if something goes wrong in India, the entire community is there to help and pick someone up, and even people you don't know, but like the sense of community, I think, is probably the one thing that I notice the most in terms of the countries that I work with versus like what I would call kind of Western, like Australia or the US or UK, where it's much more kind of individually focused. The main difference for me is the individual versus collective approach and focus that you have to think about from a leadership angle, depending on where you're working. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
People think I'm weird because I eat lunch at my desk half the time, right? And that's just because that's like how I grew up, and I just want to sit there beavering and not talk to anybody. But that's something I've had to learn and be really mindful of, is what's needed for the team to feel connected and engaged.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Hey, so we could probably keep on going, but I'm just really, really conscious of time. And Kel, this has been a really, really good chat, and we had. Sue and I prepare, may not look like it, but we do want to, Sue, you're much more professional than I am. We've got heaps more questions. We could keep on going, but maybe I'll just start the wrap up. Sue, from your perspective, what's something that you got out of the conversation, or one thing that you learnt today that Kelly got you thinking about?
I think it's really interesting, the point that you made about what happens in you can't separate your personal life and your work life. And even though, again, I've been around for a while, it was almost like you just, whatever you did at home, you didn't bring to work, and vice versa. That seems to, that obviously hasn't worked. And now there's much more acceptance about the fact that there's got to be a bit more openness, and this whole point of bringing your whole self to work is not just about your gender or your preferences, or it's also about it could be things related back into your childhood, and you need to unpack some of those. So I thought that was really fascinating, about thinking about the person as a whole individual, not just about the little bit or the slice that you see of the person each day or for your time that you work with them.
Yeah, and it's really, I really, Kelly, what I got me thinking about was that coaching, because I did a little bit of coaching, and that I really like the way you separated out sort of the therapy and counselling versus coaching, and that looking backwards versus looking forward. So that's certainly that was one of the many things you got me thinking about. I mean, any final comments from you? Sue and I sort of asked the questions. Any comments from you in terms of final wrap up comments?
No, I mean, it's been a pleasure talking with you. And I guess the only thing I would say is that everybody should have a good therapist, because we would all show up differently. We would all show up differently in life if we had that. It's quite a special relationship, I'm learning, and it can be pretty impactful. So go get yourselves a good therapist.
Actually, it's funny, we're getting some good suggestions, because one of our previous people that we spoke to around this time said, get off the couch. So I like it.
Yeah.
We're getting lots of tips, which is great.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's an interesting kind of connection. I often think about, if we wanted to lose weight, we would have no problem like getting help from someone to do that, get a coach, go to a program, whatever. But we still have this idea that, like, if I want to get help on the mental aspect, which actually impacts everything we do, we still have this kind of concern about doing that. So it's like personal trainer for the brain. Yeah.
And I think that's certainly, I think that's a really good, thing. Certainly I talk about it with my clients, is exactly that. You go, you get a sore knee, you go to the osteo or physio, whichever professional you believe in. So the same thing, it's a muscle, right? Your brain's a muscle.
Absolutely.
It's a really healthy thing to do, to go and get it fine-tuned and the like. So, so on that note, everyone, go and give Kelly a call, and she'll look after you.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Kelly, thank you so much for making time for being on our respective couches. Sue, thank you once again. On my couch is a part of we bring this from OMC Group. OMC Group, if you want to learn more about us, omc-group.com.au, and thank you very much, and we'll see you next time on our couch.